Yes. Yes.
Just checking, am I good to go? Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the economics facilitation for today. I hope all are set because we are given people a few minutes to start and we are sure that they are all around. Today, the facilitator is called Noah. So Justin, are you there? Are you there? So we are good to go. I want to start straight away because we wanted to manage time very well. We know we are dealing with the candidates and there are certain basics that we have to remind people about. And in most cases, it is important to remember, just even, to remember what the paper constitutes of so that we are ready not only for the mocks, but also for the final papers. If you are in this classroom, you must remember that the paper is given a paper code P220. So on our timetables, usually when we are looking out for which exams come when, we always see P220 that represents the subject. As I'm about to share the page, you must remember that this paper has two papers, paper 1 and paper 2, of which either papers have section A and section B. And under these sections, shall discover that alternations have always been made, where in those other days, people used to have quite a number of sections from A up to J, but now we have A up to E. And therefore, when we are revising using our question banks, we should not get scared, especially those question banks that are of those days of the 90s, of the 2000s. Today, we are having sections having part A up to E, and you can never guess which part will come. But at least we are very sure you cannot see part A having, late topics ahead, like taxation. Usually they will arrange it in that format that the beginning parts can concern areas that we usually start with from senior 5. So it is very important to revise better when we do not ignore senior 5 work. At least in most cases, it is the one that will begin those sessions of part A and maybe part B in line with section A. Members, we must remember that this paper, today students are fearing it so much. It is the reason why we gather here to digest a few things about it. I know common questions that come out of our dialogues wherever we meet, things to do with when shall UNEB at one time separate which topic lies under which area. So for now, our subject, it doesn't have specific topics for a particular paper. So I urge all candidates to keep revising the same, but the tips we are going to share today are the ones that are going to help us know how do you go about a particular paper called paper 1, and also how do you handle questions that come in the afternoon that relate to Uganda as a paper 2 question. So those are key for our start. So it will depend on the advice of your teachers there. But if we look at the structure of the paper, we are aware that more marks are in section B. And under section B, we are having 4 numbers that we must choose, which again, we said are unpredictable. So it makes us to give a lot of attention to section B for starters, because we all know that it is where more marks are. And under section B, the examiners are looking out for a proper explanation, correct statement of points, and then you earn a mark. Unlike section A, where you'll just mention and go, you'll discover that for it, you are not going to waste a lot of time. There are scenarios where students have section A questions that have listed numbers, as we shall hint on them. For instance, they may say, mention 2 examples of merit goods, and then someone only gives 2. It is not safe to give 2. You're supposed to at least have an excess backing in most cases when you're answering. So if they ask for 2 things in A, or 3, or sometimes even 4, as a student, make sure you go an extra mile to list more than 1. Reason, because one of the answers may be wrong, and then the other one rejuvenates your answer back or your mark. So in most cases, it is wise to give an excess of 1. And if they ask, mention 3 ways of how probably monopoly can be controlled, don't mention only 3. Go ahead to give at least 4, and don't give 10, because when you give 10, you're wasting time. Then there's also a tendency of students coming and failing to distinguish concepts as they wish, or as not following the instructions from the papers. Sometimes the order is key. You may find that they require you to distinguish between a public good and a merit good, and they'll strictly follow that order. Or they may ensure that you make them in singular in case it is 1, and then you do not make them into plural. But my concern here is on those distinguishing words we use. We usually make use of while, which I encourage the majority of you to do. So by using, or sometimes when they say whereas, and it is wise to put it on a separate line, because usually when you just phrase everything in the same paragraph, when you are, for example, distinguishing concepts, you may find that somebody marks very fast and then does not see what you are handling. So it is wise to put a concept in one paragraph, and then you put while as a separating word on another line, so that your 2 concepts are clearly seen. Then in the same section A, because we said it is compulsory, try your best not to skip any parts, because sometimes there are certain parts that may come and from your efforts that you apply, you earn a mark. But we are emphasizing that you make use of introductory statements. They are key because we assume that you are not going to attach a question paper, especially come November. But at least when you introduce what you're answering, it becomes easier for the other people who will be marking to know what you're answering, and then you go on. So like I've said earlier on, please, when they mention 4, give 4 things, try to give an excess of 1. Let your script have at least a maximum award mark, so that even if they verify by remarking it, you still earn the same points. Then lastly, under section A, you must remember that this subject has an element of a few calculations, and people miss out marks on this, yet we can always get scores. The concerns under these calculations is that you have to emphasize the formula. Sometimes the formula is key and you added a mark. Whether you have abbreviated or put it in full, they'll consider. And then the coefficients that go into substitutions. Let's not calculate from our mind. Let us fill all the figures. If you are calculating, for instance, elasticity, you're going to put the cross elasticity formula, then the substitutions until when you arrive at the last step. Now you'll discover that some people miss out a mark just because they are leaving out a few things. So put everything there, you'll be given a mark. And the emphasis is about the formula. So in brief, how can we revise section A? Usually it is those small concepts that the teachers dwell in from every topic. And because we have those words differentiate, distinguish, define, what is meant by, you have to revise and then conceptualize this, because when they will be giving you scores, they'll consider keywords in certain concepts that must not be forgotten. Then I want us to draw a difference between the two papers, because usually it is a challenge to majority of the learners, and somehow it becomes an issue when it comes to attempting questions. So paper one, like you are seeing me sharing the page, usually looks at testing knowledge of economics and concepts, which we said comes without application. It is the reason why majority of the questions in paper one will have the word in an economy, because they are open-ended. They are not restricting you to anything. And for that reason, it requires one to, for instance, be knowledgeable about economics concept. And we shall later see that the tenses that apply to such a paper, in most cases, will be the so-called present tense. And where we shall see another tense that comes is the one we shall call the future tense, when they ask something about suggestions. So in doing this paper, questions will come either when they have something called in an economy, and then any particular economy will be applied to such concepts. But a case in point is that when they are marking, please ensure that you emphasize the other introductory statements. And then after you have introduced, especially when it comes to part B, someone says distinction between price elasticity and income elasticity of demand, and then he gives the 4 marks. We said maintain the order of defining the first one. Then you go to the second one with the separating word in the middle, while, and then you go on. But when it comes to the other part, don't just come and answer. Introduce what you are going to answer. If it is concerning, for instance, factors that influence elasticity or low elasticity of any nature, you just don't lose anything. If you actually start by introducing, then you start to answer. When you're starting to answer the questions, straight away go to the points, members. Don't waste time. In because cases, this is not a GP paper where you'll say first of all, secondly. So let's ignore that. Let's look out for ways of emphasizing point statement. And we are yet going to see that sometimes there are cases where you'll mention a point and then put a full stop. Then from there, you will explain in line with what the question wants. And that's why you are saying set the point clearly by qualifying them. When we say qualifying, the point should be not so brief. Some of the pamphlets we land on just want to make a us buy them and they have something to earn. I'm not against them. They are good, but sometimes they don't bring out the way points are supposed to. So I request you to follow what your teachers are giving you in terms of point statement. You not just say price and you stop there. It should be maybe price of a commodity. You not say simply income. You have to say income of the consumer. A point must be clearly stated in line with the nature of the question. Now, like we have said, in this paper, you'll notice that the tense is usually present tense. So we shall have questions that bring out effects and we shall handle them with the present tense. And then where need be, we shall see theories also being brought here. That is when we shall apply the criticism or the statement of them, the way the developers helped or rather developed them. So in brief, paper one is general in terms of handling open-ended questions because it applies to all economies. But when it comes to paper two, we are calling it a more practical paper because this time we are extracting concepts that we have been taught to relate it to the Ugandan facts. That's why we say it tests the ability of learners to relate the learned concepts to Uganda as a country. And therefore, it calls us to be knowledgeable for starters, because there are things that they'll teach you, and we shall discover that when it comes to our country, Uganda, they do not apply. So in that, the examiners will not give it attention because they'll say this one doesn't work in this country. We shall look at examples. Sometimes when they ask to mention methods of price determination, you'll discover that when it comes to Uganda, it is something different. There are some that we shall leave out for that reason. Then it also calls for other tenses that we have not mentioned. That is when we shall see the present tense, then present continuous tense, where questions are asking what is going on in a particular country, that is Uganda. So in our explanation, as we are going to see, we shall discover that you must rotate in the same tense from the word point statement, but also in explanation. Then they will always bring questions that call for suggestions. There, we shall advise that please state the point in present tense, then follow it with a suggestion. As we shall see later, the suggestions can be supported by either saying government can, and then you continue in line with the explanation, and then you maintain that government should, government may, and because we are suggesting what will come in the future, then even words like will sometimes now are given attention in this case. So that is a suggestive tense. And the other tense is what we shall call the past perfect or past participle, where we have measures, which measures have been. So we shall discover that the tenses will still change. Then when it comes to tenses, sometimes we laugh, when we see advanced students failing to master some of these. And yet they become key because when it comes to answering questions, you'll discover that you'll get a 0 just because you have misfired. So we have shared a page and how we can apply these tenses in this subject. So we shall have those words that you are seeing. Someone says leads to, results into, facilitates, controls, and others. It is then the everyday tense or the present simple tense, which applies to things like effects or merits or demerits or implications. But when it comes to the future tense, they are asking you to suggest something. When you're suggesting, we expect you to use what we call command language from even the statement. That's why I said at the start, if you go on and explain to the other examiner by mere stating what you're answering, and you say the following are the suggested measures to control unemployment in an economy or in Uganda, then your statement is enough to show that all the answers you're going to give are coming from opinion-seeking kind of answers or the command language. So here we say, if you're going to talk about promote entrepreneurship skills, then later on you must show how can this one be done? Or when it's done, what does it result into? That's when you accompany and say this can be done or this may do this. So you suggest with present tense, which is the future facilitate, and then you follow it with should, can, or may. But we also have that continuous tense where sometimes we see questions addressing what is going on. Explain the measures being taken in controlling unemployment or controlling inflation. Under that, the point statement from the word go will be present continuous, but even when it comes to explanation. So when we shall go into the details, we shall emphasize this one. In most cases, students start very well. They say facilitating infrastructure development or promoting labor skills. Then after that, they say this can. Then there you are going astray. You're supposed to maintain the tense. This is helping, or this is facilitating this, and you go. Then for the last tense we are looking at is usually the past tense or present perfect, where we have had questions addressing the plural nature when they ask what measures have been adopted to maybe to control something or to solve. Then there the answers will again change. You'll use point statement when it is in that tense, and then thereafter even the explanation. Let's try our best to make summaries, because in most cases when teachers are teaching us, they try their best to give us the two, but sometimes they leave out one as a way of homework, and it is good that we can learn this. So I'm sharing that page to see that that is how the pages should look like. And then we also have other cases later on we shall share. Then about question interpretation, please try to read and understand each question, and you do what we call proper question interpretation. It is always wise to move out of that room when you have tried your best to at least interpret the questions. Why? We should not rush, take a lot of time before choosing these questions. Sometimes when we are under pressure as learners, we get excited, especially if you have read about something and then you just see it. So it is always wise to give time to the question papers and then exactly interpret. I want to bring an example. Last year, I think in the morning, paper 1, they asked candidates to explain the factors that affect the successful implementation of, I think, import substitution industrialization strategy. And usually when we talk about affect, in our subject, unlike other subjects, affect is the same as determine or influence. And when students wrote, when they saw affect successful, they thought that one becomes a limiting factor. So they had therefore to fail because of the word affect successful. Those are techniques by the examiners when they are doing question setting, but you must interpret the question very well before you answer it. And takes you a few minutes in this subject, it is wise to plan in most cases before you answer. Now, there are also three main parts that we want to handle when we come to questions, so that we get to know exactly what are those words that we keep facing in this subject as economics, where we have heard of people who are not doing the subject simply say students are failing because of qualifier. But not because of qualifier, it is because they are not learning exactly what the subject requires. So we have said one, we are considering a qualifier, which we said is a word or group of words that indicate whether the respondent, what the respondent must do to explain to the question. So when they say examine, explain, assess, it will always give you a picture of what you are going to give. If I can start with the last four, when they say give, you're just giving, because these are the ones that are in section A. Outline, most cases they are used in section A. Mention, you just mention. But where we discover that it is used in paper 2, and they say mention ways of how salaries and wages are determined in Uganda, please, after mentioning, because you want to earn another mark, continue to explain. So you will have qualified for the mark if you fulfill what it requires. Otherwise, there are cases where what is said, like explain and examine, will have different scenario basis for answering. Later on, we shall see when they say to assess, everyone here knows you're doing two sides of a question. Then when they ask you how, what qualifies, we shall say you'll either use through or by. And in most cases, the why questions call for the reasoning, depending on the nature of the question. So when you are answering questions, there are certain words you will not miss out, especially when it comes to concepts, because concepts cannot be actually described wholesomely without giving what we call keywords, words that must not miss. And so in this regard, different topics have either the causes, the effects, or the challenges, or the roles, or limitations, and of which there will be words that we cannot leave out. So certain keywords will not be left out in case you are to have a mark. And then we shall talk of the concept itself, where we cannot ignore how a concept is taught, especially when it comes to things like theories. They are not developed by ourselves, but we must state them the way they appear. For example, if you can look at the questions, you'll discover that the nature of how they have been asked demands something different. Someone says, discuss the causes of unemployment in Uganda. So the key word there is what causes people not to have jobs. And then because you're going to discuss, you are going to state a point and show how it is leading to unemployment. Let us not only focus on stating the point, ignorance of the public about the available job opportunities, or poor education system that trains job seekers than creators. You have to go on and show how does the poor education system Uganda has make people to be unemployed. So we focus on the qualifying word is the real cause of the unemployment, and then you relate it to. If you can go for the second part, why may price mechanism be desired? Here, we are looking at the concept itself, and it is about focusing on the price mechanism. So in most cases, they may say desired or undesired. you look at the reasoning in most cases. Then for certain things like causes, like in topics of employment, inflation, income inequality, please, the answers will differ and depend on the way the question is said. For instance, for majority unemployment questions that look for causes, you're going to explain why people may lack jobs in any given economy. And when we are looking at that, they may become specific by looking at the involuntary causes, but at certain moments, they can even look at the open urban one. If you go back into the question banks has ever featured, then inflation will again describe what makes prices probably in an economy or in this country to keep on increasing, or what makes people to have differences in earnings, which you call income inequality. You'll discover that everyone earns in a country, but the differences in those factors or variations are the ones that are going to cause the inequality. So there are words they will look out for, where they say, look at differences in level of education, then you go on to explain. Variation in access to credit, then you go on to explain. So it depends on the nature of the question. Otherwise, we shall also look at, questions that bring solutions or outcomes. Outcomes are the effects or roles and contribution. And we say usually the action takes place on a regular basis, but without bringing the other outcomes. Or sometimes when they say reasons or intentions or objectives, where we shall later see you must start with the reasoning. And when you are giving reasoning, we start ourselves straight and say to do this, or for the reason of this, or so that, or in order to, something like that. Then later on, we shall see features. And under features, we're going to describe features of market structures, and we shall discover that the features differ from those of other sectors like informal sector, agriculture, or industry. Then we are going to face questions that come with circumstances or conditional questions. And as you know, the subject is evolving with also theories in place. So if we can start with A very fast, we said there are semi-structured questions where we emphasize short but concise answers. And the instructions that come on your question paper usually has that instruction given. But even when it is short and concise, like we know, let it make meaning. And therefore, that's why we have given an example. If they ask two factors that determine or influence demand for goods, you must state the point in its nature of making meaning. You do not say price and you stop there. You must say price for what? So yeah, that's why you say price of the commodity. You don't say income. You're supposed to say level of income, size of the population, and go on and go on. So the point statement must make a meaning, but we must remember we say even for that reason, let's give more than the required. If they have asked for 2, try to give more than 2 to be safe. But don't give many because we said earlier on, you're wasting time. For calculations, I don't want to repeat this. I said you state the formula, substitute the items needed, and then put the answer. And where units are applied, please apply them. If you are calculating final changes in income, then you'll have to attach any money units given. When they bring shillings, you attach shillings. If they bring Dollars, you use dollars. But we all know under elasticity, we do not apply any units. So there are those moments where you must learn when do we apply units and when we ignore. For instance, there are those concepts where they give us scenarios of distinguishing, or sometimes they say differentiating. We usually encourage you to start with the concept asked. If they say distinguish between a free good and an economic good, they have used singular. So it means in your definition, you'll have to say a free good is the one. But if they say distinguish between free goods and economic goods, then you must make your answer in plural and say these are goods that exist in abundance. Then thereafter, you finish, you come and use a separate line and start and say whereas. So we encourage you to use while or whereas, because usually in most cases when people go for the other whereas, they say W-E-double-L, and then that has never been a separating word. So in most cases, it is not good to use such a word. You rather stick to the while, which is better than. Shall also have questions that involve solutions to either challenges or limitations or hindrances. And in your giving, you must give a solution that applies to the problem, as we are going to see later on. Examples, if they have asked, explain the measures that have been taken to reduce unemployment in Uganda. So we said earlier on, you tell the examiner the following are the measures that have been taken to reduce unemployment. You do not lose anything to state it when you're answering. That is the best way, because there you are protecting your answers. If they even give your paper to somebody else who has not got a question paper, it is easier for you to know what part you were answering. So it is wise to begin with the introductory statement and say the following are the measures that have been taken to reduce unemployment. Let's desist this practice of simply coming and giving just because we think 3 hours are not enough. They are just enough. But when you are starting to answer, avoid these words of first of all. Next, we said we ignore that one because economics looks at point statement, explain it, and then you go. So here, because of have been addressed as plural, but when you're answering, you're supposed to only consider the singular bit of it. And under singular, we shall say extended, affordable capital to the people. It is the other word that would have started with where students come and say, government has extended. Don't waste time. Just say extended. That is, if you're answering question of have been. If it is about advertising, advertised jobs to the public, what has that one done? It has increased public awareness about the existing jobs, which has helped to solve unemployment. Remain in the same tense. If you're talking about land tenure system, then you simply come and say expanded or provided access to the favorable land tenure system. And what has that one done? It has given access to people to access land, to set up investment, which has ended up creating employment. So remain in that tense because it is the examiner that has asked to address issues that have been taking place, or rather have taken place. But in the same scenario, they may change the tense and ask about what measures government is doing, explain the measures being taken. We shall discover that this is a present continuous tense. So if you're going to write, you will say extending affordable capital to the people. Then in your explanation, this is enabling people to set up businesses. So you still remain in the same tense, extending affordable credit to the people. This is helping people to set up, which is helping in like that. Then when it comes to suggestion, where we normally fail, we have said earlier on in paper 2, the three tenses will always appear. Suggestive tense will come largely in paper 1, but the other paper 2, which is the afternoon paper, will always have the 3 or almost all tenses. So we must be ready in our summary books to explain these tenses clearly well. And my advice is please write these same points in the 3 tenses, ready to attack any question that comes in that test. We don't want people to fail and people say the English is the problem. Then I've just shared screen about some of those questions that come having varieties of questions in line with the tenses we have talked about. Kindly write them and then later on develop answers against them in the respective tense for as long as you have written the other introductory statement and you show them that it is important to address them to Uganda. Suggest measures that should be taken to stabilize prices of agricultural products. So you must have known the reason why price fluctuations are taking place. Then as a scholar, you then suggest, when you suggest Sorry, members, for a little hiccup, but I think I'm back now. I apologize for that. Then we are still going through, Teacher Stephen, we're still going through a few of these highlights, talking about the tenses, because tenses are the ones that normally give us challenges. I want to go to the next slide. It's not sure. So we have items that involve outcomes, or sometimes they say implications, or impacts, or effects, or consequences. And usually those are the questions that come when they say explain the effects of monopoly. Please, you should never forget that it will always be calling for two sides, positive and negative. However, there are certain areas where we consider that certain topics may, yes, have the effect, like some of you have studied inflation. When it comes to hyperinflation, even when the question has the effects, it is going to address strictly the negatives, because hyper is usually bad. So it will always depend on the nature of the questions, but effects usually call for the positive and negative, or the advantage and the disadvantage. And where they become so specific and they look at adverse effects, then strictly a candidate is supposed to center on the negatives. So how do you do that? You start with the other tense we talked about. For instance, you are seeing unemployment, effects of monopoly rather. When you are talking about this, you will show the examiner that they are positive and negative. Then it is wise to start with the positive side, and then you say creates employment. Then you go on to show it is because of the increased economic activity, and then that monopoly requires, and then you go on to show how employment is done. Then at the same time, when you come, you will maintain the same tense. Monopoly again leads to unemployment because it restricts other firms to join, or because of him operating at excess capacity. But the thing is, you'll not mix them. You'll separate them. Candidates, please kindly separate the effects. In the paper, no one will tell you that separate, but it is always known to you that you're supposed to separate. Then we have items that involve parts of roles and contribution. And in this case, members, we have said the roles and contribution in most cases are confused with the outcomes, which we said is not correct. Because any role, we shall discover questions like role of multinational corporations, role of public enterprises, role of parastatal bodies. They will always recommend either to use present tense or continuous, or sometimes what we call an action verb. So either of the three is taken, but avoid using the other tense, which we are talking about as past tense when you are doing roles. In most cases, it is important to show and say promote employment, or promotion of employment, or promoting employment. So it is always better that way when you're answering items that involve roles or contribution. I want to move on. I guess I'm not the first, because we shall have to give people time to ask a few questions. And thank you for the audience. So to become specific, if we are talking of the role of the informal sector in Uganda, or sometimes the contribution, when you're explaining the role, this time you'll have to talk about the positive part of it. But if you're told to examine or assess, this time you're going to talk about the positive roles the informal sector does, and later on, you'll show the negative roles. So it will always depend on the nature of the question. But our emphasis is that you'll say creation of more employment, or creating more employment, or creates employment if we are talking of one. If there are many and it is plural, you say create employment. So the focus is on those three when it comes to roles or contributions. Then sample questions there. We have role of capital, role of price mechanism. Usually the roles as direct when it comes to the price mechanism. What does the price mechanism do? It is the functions it takes on. Quite different from the advantages they have. Or if you look at number 3 and 4, you discover when you're assessing contribution of foreign capital investment in the development of our country, Uganda, we shall assess the positive contributions the private investment do, and then because we are assessing, we shall also show the negative. We must remember what I have talked about. The same applies to number 4. We shall show the 2. But look at number 5, the role, explaining the role of agriculture. It is going to be one-sided, looking at only the positive. It does. 7 talks about 2 sides, but 8 talks about 1 side. So we must take caution of such things. Then if we have questions that address objectives or aims, these days we even have rationale or the motive. Someone writes and says, account for the privatization of public enterprises. We are going to use what we have termed as words that start because we are generating a reason to create more job opportunities. Then thereafter, you explain how these jobs come up because of privatization, or if they say, what is the rationale of privatizing public enterprises? You either say 2 or in order or 4. Why is it necessary to regulate price mechanism? You look at the defects the price mechanism brings about, and then you work on them as a solution. Why may import substitution industrial substitution be developed? You look at the reasoning or the advantages they bring, but we generate a reasoning from them using a starting word which you have called it to, because we are addressing objectives or aims or rationale or the motives. So sample questions are of such nature. Why may government impose price controls in an economy? And then why may they be avoided? It will always depend on the nature of the questions. But they in most cases, if you look at our long list here, almost all will address such answering. Then we have comparisons and contrasts, which we assume everyone, if it is brought, will have to pass, because you either look at similarities and differences or comparison in terms of advantages over the other concept that they are talking about. So whenever they bring about such comparisons, when they ask us to explain the advantages of debt financing over taxation financing, it is true, you will have to compare the advantage that debt financing has over the other one that doesn't have in every point. So try your best to compare the points. If you don't compare and you only write an advantage, you will not get a mark, because the question is addressing contrast or comparisons. So there are cases where they separate, if they say differences and similarities between pure monopoly and monopoly competition. These are market structures. In most cases, you look at the features they have, sometimes the activities they undertake, or the nature of profit they earn, and the nature of customers they deal with, the items of government intervention. All those will be basis of you either talking about the similarities and differences. For example, in a monopoly and monopolistic competition, if you are looking at a similarity, they all have many buyers. And later on, when you look at the difference, you will discover that monopoly makes abnormal profits both in the short and long run, while monopolistic competition makes normal profits in the long run. That's a contrast. I see Chizito Godfrey with a question. May I address you later, Mr. Chizito? I don't know whether it is okay. Fine. Then areas that involve significance or uses or importance, usually we say you apply simple tense and go on and keep the explanation. And for instance, we have importance of computing national income, uses of price indices, or taxes. Please maintain that simple tense. Then about theories, in most cases, we have what we call the major theories of economics, and others are minor. And then for us, we treat them, when we are teaching you as the old teachers, we give them to you, but we emphasize what they state. You must state what the developers of the theories wanted to address without you adding on your own words. And when they will be marking you, they'll focus on what did the theory state. So we have Keynesian theory of unemployment, marginal productivity theory of distribution, comparative cost advantage, Malthusian population theory, and then we have the quantity theory of money by Ivan Fisher. The others are minor theories, iron log wages, and others, but we focus on this one. Usually with them, we want to focus on the question of what they state. And then usually after knowing what they state, we must dwell on the assumptions they hold. Some of the assumptions are the ones that we base on to do the criticisms or the relevance part of them. And later on, we identify where they are relevant or applicable to our countries. In most cases, these theories, you'll discover that they are talking about things that are far away from our reach. It is the reason why I want to emphasize that we read them, conceptualize them, and we pray that they turn up, because as theories turn up, students have always passed them over one reason, that for them, they don't call for a lot of explanation. You'll state and then criticize it later. For instance, when they say, to what extent is Malthusian theory of population relevant? You'll have to show the extent where it is relevant, but the other side will be irrelevant. And under irrelevant, you can straight away come and criticize and say wrongly, and then you go on. Or you can say it assumes this, yet this and this is happening. So in most cases, when you understand the theories, it becomes easier for you. And we should not mix them. We should have the specificities about them, all what they ask. And we must know where are marks put or scored on each of these theories, depending on a particular theory. So some of those are there, and you have seen them in your papers in most cases. Stating the Malthusian population theory, you'll state what Malthus said. Malthus was talking about population growth, that it depends on food supply, and then you'll get a mark. Then thereafter, he mentioned that the population grows at a geometric rate, where we normally discourage you from quotations of those figures because sometimes students end up quoting wrongly. So leaving it out, you have not done a mistake. Then Malthus went ahead to show the population trap. And after the trap, all those, there's a mark in each of those statements, went ahead to offer the solution is using positive and negative checks. And where need be, if you look at the marks allocated, you now can apply a diagram thereafter. So if we can look at B, explain ways in which the theory is relevant, we pick out those areas where we see his ideas relevant. Him talking about food not being enough, we pick out food shortages. That is what he was talking about. Him talking about that it reaches a time when people die, we pick about land disputes. Then we still have survival areas of subsistence production, so the theory is applicable. But then a large part of it is irrelevant. The same applies to the iron law of wages, Keynesian theory of unemployment. You remember Keynes talks about one cause of unemployment, which was the deficiency in aggregate demand for goods and services during an economic recession. And then thereon, he went ahead to give the solutions. So I've just highlighted a few of these, but it is always good to handle them. Then for features, questions that involve features, shall we usually look at two scenarios? There are those features of the structures like agriculture, formal, informal sector, and then you address industry and you go on. Private sector. There we have words that we call descriptive words or adjectives, which must not miss. Why do we insist on these ones? It's because they make our point to qualify to be factual. It is the reason why we call them qualifiers. Some other people who don't have economics usually say students are failing because of qualifiers. No, not everywhere we apply a qualifier, but they make our points become factual. Words like mainly, majorly. So if you are answering something to do with industry or agriculture, and you say most farmers, most becomes a qualifying word. Otherwise, when you say farmers use skilled or semi-skilled labor, you may have left out the other part that does not use such type of labor. But when you say most farmers, it is obvious and clear that you have even spoken about other farmers. So it's the reason why we emphasize putting them across, and without them, you'll not get a mark. However, when it comes to market structures, please, for them, they are unique. Much as they are called market structures, students should be made to know that for them, we do not apply such words. We speak, the characteristics of these markets the way they are. Bridget, I'm seeing you have raised up a hand. I'll come back to you. Kindly allow me to finish up. There's that question session that is coming. Otherwise, I'm seeing the hand. Thank you. And then we have those. Number one, market structure. Number two, it's agriculture. We apply the other ones. Then industry, formal, informal, dual. So whenever you say market structure, don't apply them. Then let's end with a few questions that I prepared. And I had a reason why I chose these ones. Last year we were surprised. Xavier High School, Chivoga, thank you very much. I'm seeing the hand. I'll respond to you later. We saw, occurrence of those areas that are a little bit neglected. For instance, we have taken long without seeing such questions appearing. So we kind of brainstorm and say, why don't we do something about this? So we all know that multinational corporations are usually business organizations that operate in multiple countries and have branches all over the world. And in each branches, they have subsidiary firms. And some of these, we are aware of their presence. So when they start to work in one country, they keep on going to other countries. So when they ask us to examine the role of multinational corporations, for starters, we shall discover that you're going to avoid wasting time defining, because you don't have marks for that. They have not said define them, but we only defined them here because we are taking on a discussion. So kindly please go straight and show that the examining roles are positive and negative, which means we are going to show them having something to do. And we remember the way we talked about role, we said you can use present tense or you can use the ing, and then the roles in a promotion way. If, for example, they promote employment, then minute. So if we looked at the positive roles, we will discover that we have highlighted feeding the saving investment gap. So ing comes, or even if a student says fills the saving investment gap. So you can use that or the other one. And then later on, you go on to show how that gap is filled. We are saying a student can save by bringing in foreign capital. So you emphasize some explanation on how this is creating a positive role in Uganda. But when you are answering, you're going to start up there to show the positive role. You keep on explaining. So points are written there, fills the manpower gap, and then you go on to show how it fills the technological gap or promote technological transfer. So gap question, gap answers, in most cases, So we are seeing points there because we know our teachers gave them to us. We are just showing that a student is meant to do the two, promote friendship between Uganda and other countries. You show how that comes through mutual benefit, and then you show the advantage of that. When you say develop local skills, this comes through the training or seminars they encourage, and then you show the advantage of skill generating. If you say the widen consumer choices, you now bring out that variety. After variety, what do we benefit from it? Then you must remember that there is also the other side of the positive part, the negative part rather. The page I'm sharing, you are seeing the worsen, the balance open position, just because of the increased expenditure they do to the imported intermediate raw materials. If they now bring limited capital outflow, we shall become specific. Sometimes it comes in the form of the profit repatriation because they are working here, but because they have where they came from, they go and take back those profits back to their mother country, so we lose. And because they come here with adoption of machines, they end up making our people lose jobs due to automation, or they end up outcompeting our local farms. So you go on to explain the two sides as I have shared. Then when it comes to the other part, which is the negative, the problems they face, please straight away explain by putting point statement, which we started with in this session, by stating it, and then you explain how it is a problem. Kangurumira, please, I'm seeing you, shall come back. Thank you. So those problems you are seeing us sharing, they are the ones that these companies face in this country. So try your best to learn how to explain. If it is higher rates of inflation, we are creating it as a problem because it makes their businesses to spend more money. The fact that the inflation rates create increased costs, and then thereafter they are affected in terms of business. If it is about poor land tenure system, it limits access to proper use of land and then limiting expansion of them in different parts. If it is about poor political climate, it continues to discourage them in setting up these investments because of fear of dying. That is why we say due to fear of losing life, but also destruction of property. If it is small size of the market, you emphasize that it leads to low profit margin and therefore limits them to expand. You ensure that in every explanation, you bring out the point very well. Kangaroo Milas, I've seen the hand, but I'll come. Let me wind up. Then we have such a number, looking at economic growth and economic development. Then part B is key because it is where you'll find the 16 marks where they will say, examine the measures being taken to increase the rate of economic growth in Uganda. So it is a number that comes in paper 2 and it's going to address the tenses. And under the tenses, you are going to see that the point statement will be present tense, but even the explanation. Please emphasize this one. Under here, we are going to discover that when you're explaining, you will emphasize point statement in the present tense and then also the explanation. The two must match. But for part A, we usually say economic growth is persistent increase. And they'll look out for what we call keywords. It is most cases, we want to see that word persistent increase in the volumes, or sometimes quantities of goods and services produced in an economy. You can even end up with the time frame if you want, but as long as the keywords are not left out. If you look at how I have presented, I am emphasizing putting a separating word in the middle of the other concept so that your work is clearly seen. You don't have to put everything in one paragraph. You try your best to ensure that the two are separated. And when you come to economic development, it merges the two. There's persistent quantitative, but at the same time, qualitative increase in volume of goods and services produced, and you end with the time frame over time. So for the measures that have, that if you go back, they asked measures that are being taken. So please adjust the ones I'm sharing are for the other question that in case they are asked have been. So in our scenario of the question, these answers cannot apply to our question. I want to be very clear. I put it clearly so that later on, as you're facing teachers that side, they should change these points. My first point is improved labor skills. The point is supposed to become improving labor skills. Then what is this one doing? to ensure that there is present continuous. So all these points I have shared, please try your best to change them, and please, all this one number two should be developing techniques of production, because we are answering a question which has measures being taken. Then if it is land tenure system, changing the land tenure system, and the advantage is it is giving access to proper use of land, which is helping creation of more investment. And then you must show that output all the time being reflected. If it is about infrastructure, it will be developing infrastructure, stabilizing prices for that point, or controlling inflation. Then fighting conservatism. I think there was a typing error around here. Then stabilizing the political atmosphere. Some of these points will always be common in this subject. When we stabilize political atmosphere, create confidence to these investors so that they are assured of their lives, first of all, but also property. So kindly change this to suit the question that was advancing present continuous. Then if we come to the other question of the functions of the central bank, the function is more like the roles that a particular institution is known for. So in this case, you'll straight away show what the central bank does, but part B is the one that has more marks. You'll find that if we are to accord marks against it, the examiners or the setters will put around 12 marks. And students usually fear such questions, but they are doable and passable, because you'll discover that for them, they don't require a lot of points. They require quite few, but the emphasis will be put on the how part. So part A says functions of the central bank, but part B looks at how the central bank controls the process of credit creation. We shall see later. It controls it usually through manipulation of the process of credit creation using the tools of the monetary policy. But for starters, if I'm a student, I would say the following are the functions of the central bank. Then I start, and then I say the central bank issues the country's currency. This is done by printing currency notes and minting of coins. Then you go on. Number two says it is a banker to the government, not bank. You must show that it is a banker, which in English we know it is related as keeper. So banker to the government. How? By keeping government funds, because we are all taught by our teachers that all monies of government are kept by the central bank. But not only that, even the foreign exchange. Then it acts as a fiscal agent and advisor to the government, for example, in formulating the budget or economic policies. All those are the functions. It is a banker to commercial banks and other financial institutions. In other words, it keeps money that the commercial banks have to keep with it, and then any other financial institution. Then it controls and regulates operation of commercial banks. It's a lender of last resort to commercial banks, where we say it whenever commercial banks run short of money and they have tried all their options, the last resort or the last end they go to becomes the central bank. In this point, does not mean that every time they run short of money, they are supposed to go to the central bank. We are using the word last resort. It comes when they have tried out all their options. It's a banker to international institutions working within a country. So when we have IMF, the World Bank, Red Cross, their money is kept with the central bank, and on and on. So you'll discover that here you'll become that brief, you state a point, and then you just throw a small explanation about it. But when it comes to this part, how it does control credit creation, you'll discover that it uses the tools of the monetary policy. That's why our answer should be, this is done through manipulation of the monetary policy tools. So that statement is lacking, but should be filled there. Sorry for the typing error. So we use, because of the word how, then we shall become specific and say through the banker rate. Then you go on to explain under banker rate, you define what it is all about and then how it is used. So there you are qualifying for the 2 marks. And for, if you go by the banker rate, the rate at which commercial banks borrow money from the central bank, usually as the central bank wants to reduce inflation or control credit, it will increase this rate so that it becomes expensive for commercial banks to borrow from it. And likewise, the other way around. Open market operation is about, just like, in any market, there are 2 activities that happen. There is selling and buying. So when you sell, you receive, but when you buy, you lose. So in between there, it is controlled in that way. And all those tools. So you'll discover that in this country, these ones are the ones that apply, and that's why we focused on those. Then, sorry. Okay. So we have some minutes. I wanted a pen because I know they are going to ask questions. We have 30 minutes to wind up, right? 30. It's 5:30. And I did that. So I want them to come out and ask now, because I did not respond quite. What you're going to.
Questions and raise up your hand and ask your question. In case you have any question, kindly raise up your hand and then you ask your questions. Yes, but you can as well send them in the chat such that they can be responded to. So, okay, looking through the chat. Okay. Okay, teacher, no, I hope you can hear me. Looking through the chat, comprehensive SS, they're saying, good presentation. Thanks, teacher. Okay, teacher, Noah, someone is asking, what is the difference between balance of payment and balance of payment at current account? Hello, teacher, Noah, are you able to hear me? Just give us a minute. Hello. Hello. Hello, continue. Continue.
Yes, on that question of how the commercial bank, or how the central bank controls credit,
Mm.
is it okay for me to start with that to look for all the points?
Yeah, there is no problem. It is very okay. Though,
Then,
even when you start like a few points, you'll still mark it correctly because it will imply that the first points you have started with address almost the continuous points that are coming thereafter. So it is okay.
then can I
Mm.
say that worsen is balance of payment position, or I should say worsen is balance of payment problem?
Now, when it comes to BOP, it is either correct, and then the position can be worsened, but also the problem can be worsened. What matters is for you to focus on the explanation, that the explanation must show how the position is worsened. Usually it is when there is high import expenditure. Otherwise, it is also okay.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Welcome. Yes, Bridget.
Yes, Lubugu, you can ask. Next time. Lubugu Jamia, ask.
Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir.
Yes, I'm here.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
So we are requesting for the difference between the BOP and then the BOP at current account.
Okay. I'm going to give it to you. You said BOP what?
BOP and then
Yes.
BOP at current account.
Is that a definition or you wanted the figure?
So like the difference.
Hey.
Yes.
Okay.
Teacher.
Okay. Yes, continue. I will answer all the queries at once. Yes.
Yes, and then we are requesting for how like we can be concise in paper one, and then like how do we show this conciseness in paper one, and then how do we write our answers in paper two?
Okay. Teacher Stephen, let me contain majority of the questions that I want to answer them at once so that everyone gets to receive them thereafter so that we don't make people stay online. Please give me others, yes.
Okay, Kangulumira Public. Kangulumira Public.
Good evening, sir.
Evening.
I thought on the other question of question 5, examine the role. I thought they mean the positive roles. If they say examine the role. But I saw master representing both positive and negative. So I got confused.
So when I didn't attach marks on that one, but when you discover the marks are beyond 10, are you listening?
Yes, sir.
Please put the 2, because in that question you'll discover that they had put 8 below, meaning that they wanted the other side as well. So that's why we addressed it in a positive and what? And negative, because of usually when it is explained, that is when we shall be one-sided. But we said when we are examining, we are going to focus on 2 sides. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
See, Stephen, give me others because I have not answered BOP people and then others.
Okay.
We want.
Then have Koja.
Yes. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Yes. My question is, do balance of payment position apply it in paper too? Because our teacher told us that balance of payment position does not apply in paper too. That is it.
Okay, I will answer that. Thank you for asking. Another one, Teacher Stephen.
I'm seeing New Cavalry. New Cavalry.
Yes.
New Cavalry. Okay, I'm failing to get New Cavalry. St. Elizabeth. So the teacher is taking note of all those questions and is going to answer at once. St. Elizabeth. Okay, I'm failing to get St. Elizabeth. Semogele Gillard.
Hello?
Yes. Oh, I'm failing. I don't know why Semogele is not. Okay. Okay, another one, teacher Noah. They're asking,
Yes.
when explaining theories, do you state assumptions and draw graphs?
When what?
When explaining theories,
Yes.
you state assumptions and draw graphs.
Okay. Assumptions and graphs. Yes, I'll answer that.
Okay. Another one, using the hypothetical of preference, explain how opportunity cost arises.
Okay, opportunity cost arises. Yes.
Okay. Another one, teacher, how do we approach questions of assess and examine?
Assess, examine.
Okay. Another one,
yes.
what is the qualifier of how? Okay. Then let me pick.
Wait. Qualifier of how.
Of how.
Yes.
Then third. Okay, Godfrey, if you can unmute Geoffrey. Okay, I think Geoffrey. Gillard, can you unmute? St. Elizabeth, go on.
Come again?
St. Elizabeth, you can ask.
Yes.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening. I'd like you to emphasize on the point of explaining the role and what is the role, especially on the concept of like maybe inflation. So emphasize about that beginning statement of what is the role, or examine the role and explain the role.
Okay.
Maybe the last one, teacher Noah.
Yes.
Someone is asked, on what extent about price elasticity of demand? Then another one, with the aid of illustration, explain how the concept of price elasticity of demand is incidence to tax.
Is what?
Is incidence to the tax, I think, something like that.
Is what?
Incidence to the tax.
The incidence of a tax.
Yeah, something like that.
Incidence of a tax, yes.
Okay, I think let's first. Okay, then also you are going to throw some. They're asking what is meant for questions such as what is meant by multinational corporations or what is meant by foreign aid. How do we answer when it has 4 marks in section B?
Very well. Multinational, and it is for international corporation, 4 marks, yes.
Okay, then the last one. Can you give the approach for the question that account for the rising cost of living?
Okay.
Okay, I think let's first go with those ones.
Yes.
Okay. First, you can put your questions in the chat.
Okay. Thank you very much for questions, members. I hope I'll exhaust this. So I want to start with the people who asked about balance of payment and then balance of payment at current account. So when we are talking about balance of payment, we are describing the difference between receipts, and the receipts comes from the word to receive. So receipts from both visible and invisible exports, and payments for both visible and invisible imports of a country. I repeat, difference between receipts from both visible and invisible exports, and payments for both visible and invisible imports of a country. And this time when you are answering that, we include the capital inflows and outflows. So we look at the earnings we get from the exports we can see, and those we cannot see. The ones we cannot see are the ones we call invisible. For instance, we export services to other nations, just like we also import services from other nations. So we look at the difference between, that is the balance of payment. Now, when it comes to the balance of payment account, it is usually a summary we make, having transactions between a country, which is, for example, Uganda, and then the rest of the nations or the rest of the world. And in this one, we are looking at payments basing on international payments, transactions a country does with its residents, and also the ones that are non-residents. So in most cases, you draw the difference between the two, and then you handle that. Then another one asked, what do you mean by how can we be concise in paper 1? And I think I want to say maybe also paper 2. When we are talking about concise answers, members, we are addressing brief but complete statements in section A. For example, I said, when they say, mention 3 advantages of the informal sector. If you know the advantages, employment, don't say employment. You say, create employment to the people. You are clear but brief. You are not going to go a whole line and a half. That's what I mean by being concise. It doesn't mean that your answers become too short. When they become too short, they'll say it doesn't make a meaning. So your statement of a point should be that it makes a meaning thereafter. Another one asked, do you have BOP in paper 2? Yes, we do. And in most cases, when we have, please kindly look through the questions that appear. If I'm not so forgetful, even last year they asked about the same question, but addressing it to what Ugandan government is doing to handle such. So it applies everywhere. It is the reason why actually our teachers teach them to us. Then another one asked, when explaining theories, do we also give assumptions? I want to re-echo this, that assumptions are not necessary, because in most cases, when they will ask to explain the Keynesian theory of unemployment, you will state how Keynes explained it. And here I'm going to be detailed for all the theories. He said unemployment arises due to deficiency in aggregate demand for goods and services. Then thereafter, he went on to show how this unemployment comes about. He said it is due to the low incomes that end up bringing low output and then unemployment results, but later on he went on to give the solutions. So from there, you can apply now a diagram. If you discover the marks around 8, but if you see there are 6, stop at that. Assumptions are only told to us so that we understand the theories, but also to use them as a basis for answering limitations. Then, do you also apply graphs? Yes, where possible. For instance, under Malthus, a graph will be drawn. Under Keynes, a graph will be drawn. There is no graph for comparative cost advantage. Then for marginal productivity theory of population, we shall describe what it says and then go on to explain. Then the other theories of quantity theory of money, they don't have a diagram. You only show. Ivan Fisher said, amount of the general price level is determined by the amount of money in circulation given velocity of circulation of money and level of transactions are healthy, constant, and then you go on to give the formula of P is equal to M of V over T. So you may just explain what each letter stands for quantity of money, but assumptions are only used when we shall use them for helping us to answer the limitations. Then another one says, how do we assess the role, examine the role? I repeat, I said, when you face such questions of assessing, they are usually two-sided because you are going to assess something positively. And because we are asking roles, we are very specific. We said 3 areas will be marked. You can use present tense and say creates employment opportunities as a role. Or you can make it a rolling in nature and say creation of employment opportunities or creating employment. So present tense, present continuous, and that role where you say promotion of, facilitation of this, like that. So it will be marked, but just know that it is positive and what? And the negative. Then another one asked, what is the qualifier of questions that come with how? Usually we say, when they ask how, you're going to answer, in most cases, using the words through or by. For questions that are direct, for instance, when they say, how are prices determined in an economy? You will say, prices are determined in the following ways. So you will say, through resale price maintenance, and then you explain. However, when it comes to market structures, they will ask you, how are profits maximized? So you'll simply state profit maximization point from the word go, because we said the first wording of max come from the word of profit maximization coming when there is marginal cost equating to marginal revenue. So here you are not going to say through, but you are simply going to say profits are maximized by any firm that they are talking about. And thereafter you come and say, by emphasizing marginal cost equating to marginal revenue, and you say in brackets, you say MC is equal to MR. Today, they did not do the illustration of market structures, but from there, the question is the so-called how profit. So then thereafter, you'll draw the diagrams, and then diagrams will be marked right when they are all correctly drawn, meaning the axes must be well labeled if it is market structure, but equally with the other diagrams that apply in economics. Sometimes they will ask a student to be chopped off marks if he has not labeled either side. So let's not forget about this. Let's remember to label them. Some have price, others side have quantity. For Chinese, it will have aggregate demand, aggregate supply. Then the other vertical side, or the horizontal side, will have the GNP, or the gross national income. When it comes to labor, the curves will differ. When it comes to market structures, we shall have price, cost, revenue at the vertical side, but output or quantity on the horizontal. So let's emphasize the illustration. But usually when they are marking market structures, they will emphasize that a wrong diagram followed by a correct explanation and is used 0 because the two are not correlating. So try your best to practice these illustrations. Don't base on the scenarios of where people say market structures do not turn anymore because last year did not feature anyhow. You never know in your year it could be the turn. And they are possible in case you specialize in drawing them because usually their explanations are brief, but you emphasize what they are marking. When the teachers are teaching, they give you all the details, but you try your best to only focus on the question. For example, when they ask about profit maximization, focus on the price, go on to show the output, then end with the profit. And under profit, emphasize profits are maximized in the short run whenever there is average revenue exceeding average cost. And then you show with the shaded region. The shaded region must be indicated using the rectangular nature format So you name from a certain letter going to the right hand, and we said use your letters as long as they are not P and C, because P represents price, C represents cost. If you are called Apollot, you can use Apollot Martin AM. If you are called Zawede, maybe Juliana, you can say ZY. Use your letters. Let's not cram that we are supposed to use X and what and Y, but the point I'm mentioning is that that rectangular format is very key when we are labeling our work for the diagrams of market structures. Then somebody asked me, how would you handle a question that has what is meant by, and then it has 4 marks? Thank you very much, because people fail such questions. Now, whenever you find this question in section B, I want to insist in section B, please define. After defining, put more at the line sentence. They will give a mark or call the 2 marks for the first one, and then they will give another mark for added sentence. For instance, if you talk about what is meant by multinational corporations, the moment you define them and say multinational corporations are business organizations that operate in a variety of countries or multiple countries and have branches all over the world, then that is 2 marks for you. You either make a comma or a full stop, then you go on to show that they are located all over the world, and then you show a few kind of areas of operation, and you show that they are usually owned by developed countries coming to operate in developing countries. There you'll have the 4 marks because you have defined and shown something else. Last year, if you remember, they asked about what is meant by banker deposit multiplier in the morning. That is paper 1. So students had to define, and then as they define, they make commas somewhere. They will underline keywords, number of times, initial change in banker deposit, multiplies itself, and then you go on to show something else. So what is meant by when it is 4 marks, you define and add on something else. However, when you find it in section A, and they say what is meant by opportunity cost, please just define, because in section A, we are only giving 1 what? 1 mark. Don't add on something else. Then another one asked, how can I determine the incidence of a tax in line with the supply or demand? We all know that when we are talking about tax incidences, we are talking about the final resting place of the tax. But when we talk about impact, we are talking about the first resting place of the tax. When we say first resting, it means that when you are taxing, who gets this tax first? I want to give an example of some of you who did commerce in O-level. In O-level, we have chain of distribution. Our teachers taught us that goods move from the producer, then they go to the wholesaler, then they go to the retailer, and then they go to the consumer. Now, all those 4 people pay taxes, but the first person who pays the tax is the producer. That is why when you buy goods at a factory level, they are cheaper than when you buy them at a retail level. Why are they not cheap? Because a retailer has got the goods from a wholesaler, meaning that everyone extends that burden to until it reaches the last person. So the last person who feels that burden, we are calling it a burden because no one wants to pay tax, is the buyer or the consumer. That is why, because the tax lasts on the last person we are calling a consumer, is the one who gets it as the last. That's why you say incidence means final resting place of a tax, but impact first resting. So under elasticity, when we are doing elasticity, we say we have perfect elastic and then perfect inelastic. Then we have inelastic and then elastic. So under goods which have perfect or where goods have inelastic demand, in most cases, the burden will go to the other person who is going to buy, because for such goods, the buyers cannot sometimes miss them out. They are goods that have inelastic demand. For instance, drugs. When we fall sick and we are suffering from malaria, and you go to the pharmacy and they tell you the drug is 20,000, you'll have to pay. There is no way you'll tell you, disease, I don't have money, let me get money and I'll come back. So the whole burden will go to you. And the one who sells knows that you will have to buy. Fuel is the same. If you have a car, even if they increase taxes, the one who sells the fuel, who is the fuel dealer, the one we call fuel stations, will take that burden to you because he knows your fuel does not take water or milk. But there are goods that have elastic demand. We either can buy or we may not buy. For those ones, the burden is felt by the seller. So the seller has to be cautious. For instance, people who deal in soda products, those who deal in cosmetics, they share the burden mostly because they know, for instance, men will not go for the small cosmetics or the sodas. We rarely take some of us. You even can give it up and you survive. So that explains why when it comes to soda company or such companies that deal in elastic goods, the burden is now felt by the one who deals with them. So he has to be cautious when he's even raising prices for such. The same applies to discussions of when it comes to elasticity. So I have 1 minute to wind up. I hope I've answered the majority of your questions. I want to thank you for good audience. I still see two people, Douglas, and then Max 11, St. Elizabeth. I don't know whether Teacher Stephen can slot in you.
Yes.
Somehow.
Okay. Let me first read the ones I'm seeing here. When they ask under what circumstances may increase in money supply may not lead to inflation. Another person, okay, the material is going to be shared with you in the WhatsApp group where your teachers are. Okay, then can you give some hint on how we can attempt the questions? Under what circumstances? Questions of that nature. How can we respond to them? Then, okay. Under what circumstances those questions, what they want. Then let me see, these two people are raising their hands. Otto Douglas, kindly unmute. Otto Douglas, kindly unmute.
Douglas, go on if you have unmuted.
Okay, in case Douglas is reading, maybe you go to St. Elizabeth, girls.
Yes, St. Elizabeth. Is it you? I see Samuel Gerere, Gerard.
Samuel Gerere, go on. Samuel Gerere. Xavier High School. Unmute.
Distinguish between nationalization.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm good. So I'd like again to ask about the Keynesian graph.
Yes.
When explaining the theory. We thought that maybe the curve is no longer necessary.
Oh, I'll answer. Thank you. Teacher Stephen, bring in another person.
Maybe let's
Max
get more
11
to St. Elizabeth, unmute, and KLC. St. Elizabeth, Seems you have a burning question. Okay, OC, one of you should come in.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, how are you?
I'm good.
Yo.
Can you please elaborate more about currency reforms and direct intervention when it comes to tools of monetary policy?
Come again, come again.
Like more, you elaborate more about currency reforms and direct intervention when it comes to tools of monetary policy.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, in the chat now, what I'm seeing, people really are thanking you, Teacher Noah. Faith High School, thank you, Teacher Irus, thank you, Teacher, thank you. Yeah, but maybe wait us. Okay, Teacher Noah, also they're asking, maybe you're going to give them your number, your WhatsApp number, where they can make more consultations.
Okay. So thank you very much for the audience members. I want to say Xavier High School, I'm seeing you. Douglas, I'm seeing you. Max 11, I'm seeing you. But because of time, let me take this one and we call it a day. Someone asked, under what circumstances may increase in money supply may not lead to inflation? First of all, when you're going to answer questions of circumstances, you're going to use circumstantial format. The circumstantial format includes when you start with conditional phrases of when, in case, or if, or where. I want to give you 2 points and we go. In case increase in money supply is used to purchase capital goods, inflation may not happen. In case there are already government price controls on ground. So all answers will have in case, if, or when. Then somebody asked about Keynesian theory of employment. He feels that the graph is not necessary. I said the reason why we should not take it for granted that it is not necessary is because marker allocation in our subjects determine a lot of how much content we are going to write. If you discover the marks are 8, chances of you giving I was still talking about the graph of Keynes. And then we said, if you see 8 marks about it, part A, then you draw. If you see 6, you shall only speak about the main cause. According to him, it was deficiency in aggregate demand for goods and supply, for goods and services rather. Then he went ahead to show how that unemployment comes about, which ends up discouraging investment unless people are employed. Then he gave one solution. He did not give many, he gave one solution. That was to increase aggregate demand. Then the methodologies that apply are the ones that you got. They are around 6. Please put any 2 and you stop. Then somebody asked, can I add more flesh on currency reforms? When we come to currency reforms under monetary policy and direct intervention, we are looking at government coming out to carry out reforms in the currency. That is when they are going to do the exchange of money, and then they can adopt new notes to lower the prices replacing the ones that are on ground, and then direct intervention. This time, the central bank, for example, in our scenario as Uganda, Bank of Uganda directly intervenes by playing with treasury bills and bonds. And I'm sure your teachers worked about this. So I want to thank you for great audience. It's been a long discussion. Sorry for the inconveniences. I want to thank Bridget, Douglas, Elizabeth, Max 11, and quite many others, Koja Secondary, for the time you have, given us here. We want to wish you success, not only now in the mocks, but also in the November time. Please remember a few aspects we have talked about. If some people want to ask me, I normally do not pick calls during daytime by the nature of my work. So respond to me in WhatsApp. I'll always respond. My WhatsApp number is 0752 805 113. I repeat, 0752 805 113. Please, WhatsApp will work better. During daytime, it is hard for me to pick calls. I'm usually busy during daytime. I also teach my students here, so it's hard to keep responding to calls, but via WhatsApp, I always respond. Thank you very much. Teacher Stephen, thank you for the organization.
Thank you so much, Teacher Noah, for the wonderful presentation you have offered to schools across the country this evening. We are really very grateful for the service. We want also to thank all the teachers that have been online. Thank you so much, and all the school administrators that have been able to connect the children online. Thank you so much. We are going to continue with this program up to Friday, and tomorrow we shall have our session for another subject. Tomorrow we shall have biology A level, and then on Friday we shall have our last session. After Friday, we shall only be sharing with you different mock papers from different organizations, such that you can keep on trying. But in case your teacher has not joined any of the WhatsApp groups where we send the materials, kindly you can send me a WhatsApp message such that we can join you on that WhatsApp group, where we're going to share the different seminar questions from the different organizations and from the different schools that have been having seminars throughout this season. We want to wish you a good evening. The recording for this session is going to be shared shortly before 9 p.m. and also the seminar questions, but also every details that the different details we have been using through this session. So kindly just look at the WhatsApp groups. We shall share them widely, but also you can check on the holistic e-learning platform WhatsApp group, and then you can be able to access those materials for your revision. We want to thank you so much. Thank you so much, Teacher Noah, once again, and all the teachers. Kindly you can share those questions with Teacher Noah on his WhatsApp number. He will be able to give you responses. Let me ask Saint Elizabeth, kindly lead us in a closing prayer. Elizabeth, kindly lead us in a closing prayer. Thank you so much.